All right, guys. So, Psych224, Chapter 4 of our Abnormal Psychology textbook. There it is, right there. This section is on research methodology and research techniques. And while this stuff is potentially important as you go along in your career, especially if you choose a career in psychology or any of the sciences, frankly, it's not the main focus of this class. This is a class about abnormal psych, and I want to get into the abnormal psych. However, there are some important things I want to touch on. So we're gonna kind of blast through this really quick. I take notes on this stuff because I'm not really going to hit you with any fluff here. Everything that I talk about is stuff that you should probably know for the class because there's not a lot of it. So we talk about research methods, and this isn't just in psychology, it's in all of the sciences, but in psychology specifically, because we talked about last time how psychology has its roots in philosophy, which kind of has its roots in spirituality and magical thinking and that kind of stuff. It's really important that we are very, very strict with our research methodology, and we know exactly what it is we're talking about when we're looking at a study. And, you know, I mentioned in the introduction for this week, you know, have you ever been on social media and you've seen a test pop up to determine what your personality type is, or if your significant other is a narcissist, or, you know, or seen a quote unquote article that says, you know, according to psychologists, blah, 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 or psychologists have determined this, or this is the characteristic that all psychopaths have. All this stuff is garbage. It's absolute garbage, but it's out there. It's everywhere. And believe it or not, people believe this stuff. And you get hit with it in more mainstream media outlets than you might think. For example, I'll just throw this out at you. You may have heard that red wine was good for your health, that dark chocolate was good for your health, and that diet soda was bad for your health and caused cancer. All of those things that you have heard and have probably accepted as true are based upon a type of research methodology that applied specific to the research that was done, except the dark chocolate thing, that was complete trolling. We'll talk about that in a second. But they were sold to you by the media in a way that they were not meant to be, and basically you were lied to. And everyone in the scientific community knows that, but most of the lay people running around don't know that. And then you get a fitness industry that ends up selling billions of dollars of supplements for stuff that don't work, or people buying red wine because they somehow think it's healthy, or so on and so forth. So let's get into it. We talk about research, and we talk about research design. There's a couple different things we're looking at. One is correlation, and the other one is causation. Okay, correlation is the idea that two things are related. Causation is the idea that one thing causes another. Okay, that sounds so freaking simple, and yet we get it so wrong so often. Okay, so think about it this way. And this is true. Since 1970, I don't know, I think 6, every time the price of bananas has gone up nationally, teachers' wages have gone up statistically nationally. Every time the price of bananas goes up, the price of teachers' wages go up. What is the relationship between those two things? I'll give you a chance to think about it. Why would the price of bananas cause teachers' wages to go up? Okay, ready? It doesn't. Okay, there's no causal link between the two. There's a correlation between the two, which means for some reason, every time one has gone up, we've observed one go up, we can observe the other one go up. The fact of the matter is, it could be because every time one has gone up, the economy has been really good and the price of everything is good. The stock market value of everything is good, and also wages have gone up for that reason. That makes sense, right? But if I just present to you the two facts, the price of bananas on the stock market and teachers' wages, and they both go up, and I just present those to you, it sounds like there's some relationship between the two. There is a correlation between the two, but there's not a causal relation between the two. Okay, does that make sense? So if I run an experiment where I have a classroom and I want to study whether or not my students' grades are related to the temperature in the classroom, and I design a study where I turn up the temperature so that it's hotter in the classroom, and I measure their grades, and I measure their grades at normal temperature, and I notice that when the temperature goes up, their grades go down, and I do this consistently, and I notice those two things, then I have determined that there is what's called a negative correlation between the two. When one goes up, the other one goes down. That's called a negative correlation. And they could or don't necessarily need to go the other way, right? It could be that when I turn down the temperature, their grades go up. And that could stop at a certain point. It may get to a certain point where it gets too cold and the grades stop going up, right? So again, there's just a correlation, okay? Can we say that turning up the temperature causes grades to go down? Do we know that for sure? Are we saying it? No, we don't know that. It could be that, I don't know, when I turn up the temperature in the room, it also causes the heater to release that nasty heater smell, and it's the smell that's bothering the students, and that's what's making their grades go down. Okay, so you can't isolate and say it's a cause. You say there's a correlation. They are correlated to each other. You can't say which one comes first. You can't say which one causes the other. They're just related to each other. Okay, does that make sense? For causation, I need to create a study that eliminates all other possibilities, because you'll notice in the correlations that I was talking about, the one thing that I kept bringing up was, well, one example could be, well, one reason could be, one possible explanation could be. In a causal study, that doesn't exist. You have eliminated all other possibilities. You've gotten rid of every other, well, it could be this possibility, and the only thing that could be causing the change is the variable you manipulate. If I were able somehow to absolutely eliminate any other potential reason for my students' grades going down, other than the temperature going up, if I were able to eliminate the smell from the heater, any psychological reminders the students had of being where it was warm, any socio-cultural attachment the students have to a certain temperature, maybe they're from the Midwest where it's cold, maybe they're from the Middle East where it's hot, maybe they're from here where it gets warm and humid sometimes. If I'm able to remove all of that and isolate all of those variables and make it so it's literally only the temperature. And incidentally, that would mean not just doing it on that group of students, that would mean doing it on students in places where it's cold, doing it on students in places where it's hot, doing it on hundreds and hundreds of students all over the country, all over the world, right? I'd need a sample size of thousands of students to be able to do this, right? Because I couldn't just do it on you guys. My class of, I think I got 26, 27 right now. I couldn't just do it on you guys. You guys aren't representative of everybody. A lot of my students here are from the Philippines. A lot of them are local to Hawaii, right? You guys aren't representative of students in New York, where the temperatures and the culture is very different, right? So I have to isolate everything. And once I can isolate everything, if I can truly isolate everything, then I can say, yep, the temperature change is what's causing the grade change. Now, if you're looking at that going, wow, that's a lot. You're right, it is. Doing an actual causal study is incredibly difficult, it's incredibly challenging, and it's incredibly expensive. It really is. It costs a lot of money to perform this over and over and over again in all these different environments with all these, and to isolate all these other variables. This is why they tend to be done in laboratories where they can control everything, right? Doing an actual causal study is very, very challenging, which is why the vast majority of research out there in the world is correlational. Now, even though causal studies can tell us a lot, they're very powerful, they can tell us a lot. If we can determine that something causes something else, that's a powerful thing to say, okay? It's also extremely rare in science. Not in the media. In the media, they're happy to say that studies have shown that this causes this, this causes this, this causes this, when in reality, the vast majority of those studies are correlational only, okay? But when you go to a scientist and you say, hi, I'm from, whatever, Us Weekly magazine, and we heard you did a study on dark chocolate and its effects on weight loss. And the scientist says, well, it doesn't have an effect on weight loss. We discovered a correlation between people's weight and the chocolate. The people from Us Weekly aren't going to put that in their article because the average schmuck reading the magazine doesn't understand what that means. So they're just going to put that, yeah, he found that dark chocolate causes weight loss. And next thing you know, everyone's buying dark chocolate. Right? And that myth persists today. The vast majority of scientific studies are correlational. Right? Correlational studies aren't bad. Correlational studies are very important. They tell us a lot. Right? They give us a lot of information, but they're not as powerful as causational studies. Causational studies, true causational studies without a bunch of errors and flaws in them, are kind of rare. All right, they're hard to come by. So whenever you come by an article or you come by something on social media or you see something on the news and somebody says, scientists have determined that this causes this, take a step back, because the chances are you're being lied to. The chances are you're being told a dumbed down version of it. And if you think, oh, who cares? I mean, what's the big deal, right? Well, let me tell you the big deal. So does being black make you commit crimes? I mean, just saying that is inflammatory and it's terrible. We don't want to say that, right? I mean, that's awful. That's a racist statement, right? Everybody agrees that. If I were to say being a black person or being any race, really, white, Hispanic, whatever, causes you to commit crimes, that we're predisposed to commit crimes, we would all agree that's a terrible racist statement to make, right? Okay, fair. I agree with you on that. What if I tell you, well, yeah, but studies have shown that black people commit more crimes? That statistic is out there. That statistic is out there being used by actual lawmakers, actual politicians, actual social scientists out there, and actual jerks on the internet right now, right? To create policies. And what do they use for that? Well, they'll say, well, because in certain areas, African Americans are incarcerated more than any other race. So therefore, they must commit more crimes, right? But we know we can take a double step back and say to yourself, wait a minute, that's not necessarily how it works. Perhaps there's over-policing. Perhaps they've been convicted unfairly. Perhaps they're convicted more than white people or other people. And I'm not saying that's true. I was a cop for a very long time. I'm not bashing law enforcement or bashing the criminal justice system, but I am saying the belief that a race, any race, is more responsible or more likely to commit crime than another race is preposterous. What is less preposterous is the tie-in between socioeconomic status, policing in that area, and criminal activity in that area. And then you can tie in ethnicities into that and figure out, okay, well, which ethnicity is more likely to be socioeconomically disadvantaged given the political status of a particular country. Okay, you see how much goes into this? But just right there, I can take a correlational statistic and twist it and make it seem like a causational statistic and screw up the minds of a whole bunch of people in this country, right? I can do it the other way too, right? I can talk about how white people are more likely to be racist, right? That is also not true, okay? It may be true demographically in certain areas of the country, but I guarantee you there are certain areas of the country where there's plenty of people who are very racist who aren't white. You can go to areas of the world where people are very racist and being white has nothing to do with it. Many of the Asian countries are very racist against other Asians in certain communities, and being white has nothing to do with it. White people don't own racism, right? But it is due to correlational statistics being twisted into causational statistics and then have been presented to you, which lead people to believe this because it's great for politics. It's great for media. I can make this group of people seem like criminals. I can make this group of people seem like racists. I can make this group of people seem like crazy people. I can make this group of people seem good. I can do anything I want with statistics as long as I know how to spin it and give it to you. So why do you care about how the science is done? Well, you should, because if you actually want to be informed, about the type of information you're reading and coming across, then you should be able to read an article that says, you know, this percentage of this type of people does this kind of thing, and step back and say, wait a minute, where'd you get that number from? And what were you comparing? And what other things could it be? Make sense? Okay. So that's correlation versus causation. Correlational studies are usually done with observation, right? So I have one variable, I have another variable, and I move one variable around and I observe the effect, or if there is an effect on the other variable. And sometimes I move the other variable and see if there's an effect on the other variable. Okay. The strength of the change between them, sometimes I move this one a little bit and this one freaking goes way up here. Sometimes I move this one a lot and this one only moves a little. Okay, the strength of the change between them is what we call their correlation relationship, the strength of the relationship. So when we say something has a statistically significant relationship, what we mean is they have that strong relationship. One moves, the other one moves a lot, as opposed to one moves and the other one sort of moves too. That's the teachers, wages, and bananas thing. One moves, the other one kind of moves, right? It's a weak relationship. It's there, but it's weak. It doesn't really mean anything. An experiment is a situation where you have controlled literally every other variable and there's no other variable that can be moved. Okay. Experiments are true experiments on large social scales are rare because they're very hard to do. They're very expensive to do. I mean, you can conduct experiments on things like gravity pretty easily, right? All you need is, something you can drop. But to do experiments on humans and how humans react to certain things, that's going to be challenging to isolate all the variables because people have a whole lot of stuff that goes into their motivations for why they do different things. So when you see things on Instagram or TikTok or whatever that says, oh, we did a social experiment on this and that, well, no, they didn't do a social experiment. They set up a hidden camera and they played a prank on some people. That's not the same thing. Okay, that's not a social experiment. That's observing something that somebody else does. An actual experiment gives you a causational result, and again, very difficult to set up. Very, very difficult to set up. So I mentioned, I mentioned the unfair racial demographics against one race. I mentioned the unfair racial or accusations against one race. I mentioned the unfair accusations against another race, and how the media and politics and stuff have used, on both sides, misused science to portray things. What about just in your daily life, right? So we mentioned diet soda, we mentioned dark chocolate, we mentioned red wine. There are people out there that legitimately believe that drinking red wine will somehow prevent them from having a heart attack. That is not the case. There's not a causational study that says that. What there is there's correlational studies out there that show that people with good heart health also tend to be people who drink a glass of red wine every day. That's the study. Okay. Could it be that they just have super strong hearts and the red wine doesn't affect them? Yeah, it could be. Could it be that the red wine somehow bolsters their heart health? Yeah, it could be. But we don't have that information. We just have the information that says people with good heart health also tend to be people who drink a glass of red wine. The diet soda being bad for you or making you fat, that's one of the biggest myths in the fitness industry there is. There was a study done that found out that people who were getting diagnosed with certain types of cancers also were people who drank diet sodas. Okay, but there's no causational relationship between the two, and the statistical strength between the two wasn't all that strong. All right. But again, in the 80s and 90s, they picked this up and they ran with it and they gave it to you. And now it's part of the common knowledge thing. And it's just frankly not true. I'm not saying that artificial sweeteners are good for you by any means. I'm not in any way recommending you go out and drink and start drinking artificial sweeteners. But what I am saying is we don't have any proof that they cause cancer. Okay, and we don't have any proof that they make you fat. That's another one out there that says, drinking artificial sweeteners make you fat. No, we don't have that either. The dark chocolate thing is one of my favorites, though. There's a scientist in Europe who understood how the media just absolutely bastardizes science and gives it out to everybody. And so he created a study where he found the weakest correlation possible between eating dark chocolate and having a healthy body fat percentage. It's a very overly scientific study on purpose. It's got a whole lot of math and numbers in it on purpose. But so he came out and he said, hey, look, I've got this study that says dark chocolate is correlated with people with a healthy body fat. So the magazines and the news people and the Dr. Oz's and the Oprahs and everybody got a hold of him, and they're all very excited. And when he tried to explain it to them, their eyes all glaze over because they're not scientists. They don't understand science. And all they heard was dark chocolate causes you to lose weight. And they ran with that. And they ran with it in such a big way that it made it to all the major fitness magazines. It made it to all the major fitness internet outlets. It was on TV. It was in the news. It was on fitness. Everybody talking. And they started creating dark chocolate supplements. You can go into Vitamin Shop or GNC and you can buy things with dark chocolate in it because it's supposed to be better for you. And he later came out and said, I was literally trolling the media community. This was literally fake. Like, I purposely did this. Like, he came out and told them that, okay, I got you guys. But did they ever publish that? No. You can research it. I love it that it's out there. And I think it's one of the best examples of how the media, be it TV, the news, politicians, just your friend down the street can misinterpret the science and use it in ways it wasn't intended to be used. So that's why I want you to know about this stuff. So we've got correlational studies. We talked about experimental studies. There's also a thing called qualitative studies. Not all studies involve math and numbers and statistics, but you can't say they're not science. All right. If you look at your average anthropologist, or like somebody like Jane Goodall, who her very famous work, The Gorillas and the Myths, where she actually went and lived with the gorillas, and it's where we learned all about a lot of their habits and how close they were to humans and their social structures and stuff. I mean, she's a titan of the anthropological and zoological sciences, Dr. Jane Goodall. There was no manipulating of variables in her case. In her case, it was observational. She lived with them. She watched them. She became friends with them, and she just observed. And that's called a qualitative study. Other types of qualitative studies involve interviewing people. Maybe you wanna understand a specific social phenomenon, and so you interview a bunch of people, like hundreds of people, to try and find the common threads in their interviews about how they feel about the specific thing. And if you want to do a really good qualitative study, you'll interview people from different demographics, different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different whatevers. To see if you can pick out the common threads between them. Difficult thing about qualitative studies is because there's not a lot of math involved, it really is kind of subjective. It's up to the researcher. So I may see common threads here, but my research partner may not see the common threads. So qualitative studies can be difficult to produce in an effective way. They are very easy to produce in a very crappy way. They're very easy to produce absolute trash. But it's harder to produce good, effective qualitative studies. To say that has not ever been done would be a lie. There have been excellent qualitative studies out there, but it's hard. It's hard to do because there's such a subjective thing. Because again, you're not doing math, you're not manipulating variables. There's no laboratory, or there's no scientific rigor set up. You're trying to observe, or talk to, or interview, and then use your own subjective abilities to puzzle something out, and that is really only as good as you are. And of course, your own prejudices, biases, and things you go into the study with can affect your ability to do that really well. When I started my dissertation to get into the doctoral work, the opposite of qualitative is quantitative. That means you're going to do math, you're going to do science, right? Experiments and stuff. And they asked us, do you want to do a qualitative dissertation or a quantitative dissertation? Well, math sucks. People hate math. So a lot of people said, oh, I want to do qualitative. I went the quantitative route, and I'm glad I did, because it's so much easier. It is so much easier. To produce a really good qualitative study requires just a huge amount of effort and reworking and having people look over your work and those kind of things. So the good qualitative studies we're very happy for, but there's a lot of bad ones out there. Almost done, guys. The case study. So the case study typically is a qualitative study. The case study is where you're looking at one particular person, subject, thing, occurrence, event, just one, and you're looking at it as in-depth as you can from all angles and all sides. As of the time of this recording, Netflix has a documentary on Jeffrey Dahmer, the serial killer in the United States. You could look at that as a type of case study. They're looking at him, what he did, his background, his psychology, the types of victims he chose, the victimology of the victims, his psychopathology. They're just looking at the case from every possible angle. That's a case study. Case studies can be very, very tedious and take a very, very long time. Because if you're doing a case study on, say, a person born on the autism spectrum and their development and stuff, you're going to follow this person through their entire life, right? So your research case study is going to take 15, 20 years until, or whenever you think you're done, right? As they go through all the developmental processes, adolescence and whatever, you're just with them the whole time. And there have been case studies where the original researchers have died or moved on and they passed it on to other people and so on. So as you can see, just like with a regular qualitative study, a case study is kind of junk in, junk out. It really depends what you put into it, what kind of information we're going to get out. Do we learn a lot from case studies? Yes, absolutely. Well, yeah. Do we learn causation or correlation from case studies? No. And then the last thing we're talking about is a cross-sectional study. That's kind of the more time-efficient way to do a case study. So as a case study, you're looking at something over this long period of time. A cross-sectional study says, okay, I don't have 20 years to invest in looking at this group or this one person or this one group of people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at a group of people in the 1 to 5 year range. Then we get a totally different group of people who are in the 5 to 10 year range and a totally different group of people who are in the 10 to 20 year range. And I'm going to look at them, these three groups, individually. I'll give you an example. My own dissertation was into post-traumatic stress disorder in police officers, and how it impacted them at different stages in their career. The 1 to 5 years on, the 6 to 10 years on, and the beyond 10 years on. Well, I'm not going to spend 20 years following one cop in the hopes that he or she, poor person, develops PTSD and then interview them every week. So what I have is a group of subjects who are in the 1 to 5 year range, a group of subjects who are in the 6 to 10 year range, and a group of subjects who are in the beyond 10 year range to look at and conduct my experiments on each one of these groups, and then I can compare the groups. So it's a cross section of that timeline as opposed to following one person across that timeline. All right, that makes sense? All right, so I don't want you to be jaded. I don't want you to be cynical. I don't want you to go out there and think everything the media is telling you is a lie, and everything that the news and your politicians on both sides of the aisle are telling you is a lie. That's not necessarily the case. But I do want you to be critical consumers of information. When information is handed to you, I want you to be able to step back and say, does that sound right? All right. Thanks very much, and we will talk again soon.